In the flat, expansive landscape of East Anglia lies an airfield that has long been abandoned, but is far from silent. Bircham Newton came into being as an RAF base in 1914 and went on to play a pivotal role in the D-Day landings of 1944. However, its success came at a significant cost, with over 500 men from the base losing their lives during the years it was active. Although no aircraft have landed on its runways since 1960, there are many who believe that something else lingers in the shadows. Welcome to Phantom Trails, where today we'll be diving into the chilling history and eerie manifestations of Bircham Newton's haunted airfield. In 1967, the base was taken over by the Construction Industry Training Board, and just a few years later, in 1970, it became the set for a management training film. It was decided that the old officers' mess would be the best place to set up their operations hub. It wasn't long, however, before it became clear that this ordinary shoot was about to become quite extraordinary, in the most chilling way imaginable. One day, early on in the production, members of the crew were relaxing in the officers' mess, when suddenly, and without any clear cause, a heavy studio lamp fell towards the head of sound engineer Peter Clark. What could have been a disaster was averted, though, when at the very last minute, the lamp swerved as though it had been pulled by some unseen hand. It was, however, a significant indicator of what was to come. After discovering some old squash courts on the site, situated just behind the officers' mess, Assistant Soundman Kevin Gary decided to make the most of the facilities. None of his colleagues was interested in joining him, so one evening, Gary borrowed a racket and ball and set off to play on his own. At first, Gary had a knockabout on the left-hand court. Then, on a whim, he moved over to the other court. It was as he was getting into his swing that he suddenly became aware of footsteps in the viewing gallery behind him. Gary was no Olympian on the squash court, but flattered himself with the thought that one of his colleagues had come to watch him play. But then his blood ran cold, as he remembered that he had locked himself into the building and was in possession of the only key. Gary froze, hoping beyond hope that his ears were playing tricks on him, or that a peculiarity in the acoustics of the building was responsible for the noise. But then he heard a sigh which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Turning round, he saw a man in RAF uniform standing in the gallery and staring at him intently. Before Gary had the chance to scream, the figure vanished into thin air. Convinced that something was amiss at this old airfield, Gary shared his experience with Peter Clark, who was still unnerved by his near miss with the lamp. Bravely, they decided to return to the squash courts that night to see what they could capture on the crew's tape recorder. The warmth of summer surrounded them as they arrived at the courts, but as soon as they moved to the court on the right, the temperature dropped so much that it was like stepping into another world. The vigil didn't last very long. After a while, the creepy atmosphere became unbearable. Two men switched on the tape recorder and waited, but eventually fear got the better of them and they decided to lock the machine in the courts and come back when the tape had run out. What they discovered when they replayed the tape was extraordinary. They heard the sounds of aircraft, voices, and clanking machinery, uncannily like the noises of a busy aircraft hangar in wartime. Even more disturbing was a strange, unearthly groaning. The tape was analyzed by a BBC engineer, who admitted that he and his colleagues were perplexed. There was no technical fault with the machine. Few outside noises could have penetrated the 9-inch brick wall, and the tape was brand new, so old recordings could not have come through. The mystery of the strange recording haunted Peter Clark. Determined to uncover the truth, He convinced a group of friends to join him for a seance at the airfield. Armed with curiosity and a hint of fear, they brought along a medium. As soon as the medium entered the squash courts, he seemed to slip into a trance, his features twisting unnaturally. His breathing became labored, as if he were suffocating, and a raspy voice broke through. The name Wiley echoed from his lips, a man claiming to be an airman from a distant past. Peter was shaken. The name matched an airman who had tragically taken his own life during the Second World War. Bircham Newton's shadows stretched further than anyone had imagined, and this was only the beginning. More stories surfaced of an unseen force tugging bedclothes from sleeping students, curtains ripped from walls by invisible hands, and phantom fingers tapping the shoulder of a lone engineer in the attic, leaving him too terrified to return. And then there were those who saw them, ghostly figures, still clad in RAF uniforms, walking straight through walls that hadn't existed during the war. One man's encounter was so terrifying, he abandoned his training, never to return. The mystery grew deeper. The recordings, when shared, stirred not just humans but animals too, unsettling pets across the country. Intrigued, a BBC team arrived with 2 spiritualists. Upon entering the courts, the left side seemed ordinary, but as soon as they stepped into the right-hand court, the air grew heavy with an unshakable presence. A restless soul was trapped here. One medium, a renowned psychic, slipped into a deep meditation. A voice broke free from him, one that wasn't his own. Dusty Miller, a name from beyond. Dusty spoke of a pact made with his friends, Pat Sullivan and Jerry Arnold. All 3 were avid squash players, united by a bond that transcended life and death. Their pact, to meet again, no matter what happened. Their reunion, however, came only in the shadow of their death. The medium explained that the airmen had perished in a crash near a local church, a church with a tower, but no steeple. In their confusion, they hadn't realized they had died, leaving them stranded in the world of the living, desperately trying to reach out. The spirits of Bircham Newton were not evil, but lost. With the help of the mediums, the airmen were finally laid to rest, their connection to this world severed by a simple exorcism. When researchers later checked the records, the truth was laid bare. A plane had indeed crashed behind the church during the war. And the church? It stood just as described, a tower without a steeple. Bircham Newton may have been abandoned, but some spirits, it seemed, were unwilling to leave.